Thanks for checking out this series on the superdeker clone. In this video, we're going to look at the code flow that I use to create the game and go through both the flow chart and some of the libraries that I used for the programming. The main hockey game is loaded to start when the Raspberry Pi is turned on. The game is written in Python, and the first thing that happens when you turn it on is a little LED light show. This brings you into the main menu of options where you have two options. Basically, you can reset the scores or you can choose one of the 4 game modes. The high scores file is just a text file on the disk, so choosing to reset the high scores basically blanks it out and then brings you back into the menu options. Depending on the game that you choose, there will be additional settings, and these settings will be relevant to either the score or the time. What that means is you're going to either set the maximum score value before the game ends or the time value before the game times out. Once the settings are chosen, the game will stage, where it basically waits in a loop until the first sensor is hit. Once that first sensor is hit, the game will play, and then at any point in time you can hit the reset button, which will automatically end the game. Once the game ends, then the score will be displayed. A little check will be done to see if it's a high score. If a high score is obtained, then the game will do a little LED light show, and if it is not, it will return to the main menu to play again. The last thing that happens before the game restarts is that all the sensors are reset and the variables, so things like the score or whether the LEDs are on or off, everything goes back to basically a 0 value. Let's move on now to the actual Python code, and I'll show you some of the libraries and why they were chosen. So full disclaimer, I'm not a professional programmer. I know just enough to be dangerous. So I'm not going to go through this line by line. There's a link to the code in the details below. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask and I can answer them. What I want to do in this video is basically go over some of the libraries that I used and where to get them and why I used what I used. First thing you see on line 2 there is that I imported the LCD1602. That is from the SunFounder website, and that is a library to help control the LCD. On lines 3 to 5, you can see that I wrote loading to the LCD. That's because this program gets called during the startup, so it takes a little while for the Pi to boot up and then the program to start. That way you can see loading on the screen while everything's getting ready. The next import is the threading library. This is used for the timer. For the time-based aspects of the games, using the threading, by calling the time in another process using the threading library, what you can do is you separate the time from the rest of the game loops, and that way you can independently count up the time for various game modes, and you can call the buzzer functions so that it sounds like the game is timing out. Next, I added the time and sleep modules from the time library. On line 8, from the GPI0 library, I imported LED and button. These are just a couple of things to help me easily control the inputs and outputs on the Raspberry Pi. Next, I add the randint module from the random library so that I can create random numbers so that the sensors and LEDs light up randomly. Next thing I do on line 11 is import the Pyformata library, and this is a really cool library. What this library does is it allows you to connect an Arduino to the Raspberry Pi with a USB cable. After doing that, what you can do is you can interact with the Raspberry Pi, read or write to the inputs and outputs. So this is super powerful when you want to use boards that have 5-volt logic like the Arduino does, as opposed to the 3.3-volt logic that the Raspberry Pi does. Using this library is an easy and good way to communicate with the Arduinos for any of your projects. Scrolling down to around line 59, you can see what I do is I just use a text file for the high scores. From here out, it kind of goes through some of the main functions that are called for the game. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. You can see at the very end, at line 962, that's where I call the main function, and that is what really starts the game and starts running all the loops and everything else that goes on in my game. So 960 something lines of code, it's I guess there's a fair bit to it, but you know, it's fairly straightforward basic Python that's all been put together with some of the simple modules that have already been created with all the open source community, which is amazing. So that's it for this code review video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to add them in the comment section below. If you would like a copy of the code, there's a link below in the detail sections to my GitLab page. And if you would like to learn how to build the rest of this, please check out the other videos in this playlist as they go through the physical build and also show some of the gameplay. Thanks a lot for watching.